The clock ticked closer to midnight, the rhythmic sound filling the silence of the living room. Jason sat on the couch, his eyes fixed on the TV, but his mind was miles away. The show playing in front of him was just a blur. All he could think about was Camila. She had gone out with her friends for a girls' night, something she hadn't done in months. He tried to brush it off, but something about tonight felt different. Lately, Camila had been distant, her laughter less frequent, her phone glued to her hand. Jason couldn't pinpoint when things had started to change, but the feeling in his gut told him something was wrong. The front door creaked open, and Jason's head snapped towards the sound. Camila stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. She looked off. Her hair was slightly tousled, her makeup smudged, and there was an unfamiliar scent in the air, a mix of perfume and something else Jason couldn't quite place. "Hey, how was the night out?" Jason asked, forcing a smile as he turned off the TV. His voice came out too casual, betraying the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. Camila paused for a moment, almost as if she was caught off guard by his question. "It was fun," she replied, her tone light, too light. She didn't meet his eyes. Instead, she walked past him towards the stairs. Maybe a bit too much wine, though. Jason noted the slight slur in her words and the unsteady sway in her walk. His concern deepened, but he tried to keep his voice steady. "You sure you're okay? You seem tired." Camila's hand gripped the banister as she started up the stairs, her back to him. "Yeah, just tired," she muttered, her voice barely audible. She didn't wait for a response, disappearing up the stairs without another word. Jason sat there, his mind racing. Something wasn't right. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. He debated whether to follow her, to confront her, but he hesitated, not wanting to seem paranoid. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the nagging thoughts. Just as he stood up to head upstairs, something on the floor caught his eye. A small piece of lace, half hidden near the laundry basket. He bent down to pick it up and realized it was Camila's panties. But as he lifted them, his breath caught in his throat. The lace was stained with a strange, white fluid. It was sticky, emitting a pungent, sour smell that made his stomach turn. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the fabric, trying to make sense of what he was holding. The smell was unlike anything he'd encountered before, and it filled him with a deep sense of unease. Jason's hands trembled as he turned the panties over in his hand, his mind racing. What the hell was this? He could feel the bile rising in his throat as the implications of what he was seeing started to sink in. He wanted to dismiss it, to convince himself that there was a reasonable explanation, but he couldn't. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of running water from upstairs. Camila was in the bathroom, the door closed, and the water running full blast. Jason clenched the stained fabric in his hand, his knuckles turning white. A wave of nausea washed over him as he stood there, paralyzed by a mix of emotions: confusion, anger, fear. He knew he couldn't ignore this. He needed answers, and he needed them now. But as he started towards the stairs, a cold realization settled over him. Whatever those answers were, they weren't going to be good. The morning light filtered weakly through the kitchen window as Jason sat alone at the table, staring into his untouched coffee. His eyes were red from a sleepless night, and his mind was a chaotic swirl of fear and suspicion. Camila had already left for work, barely acknowledging him as she rushed out the door, her demeanor cool and distant. Jason couldn't shake the memory of what he had found the night before. The strange fluid on Camila's panties gnawed at him like a festering wound. He knew he had to find out what it was, where it came from, and what it meant. His gut told him this was more than just a harmless anomaly. It was a sign that something was terribly wrong. After hours of pacing the house, Jason made a decision. He would go to the clinic after work. The idea of doing this behind Camila's back filled him with guilt, but he couldn't let it go. He needed answers, even if they terrified him. He wrapped the panties carefully in a plastic bag, his hands trembling slightly as he sealed it shut. He slipped the bag into his coat pocket, feeling the weight of it like a stone in his chest. Every step he took towards the door felt heavy, as though he were walking towards some inevitable doom. At the clinic, Jason felt like every pair of eyes was on him as he approached the reception desk. His voice was strained as he explained to the receptionist that he needed something tested. She directed him to a lab technician, who took the bag from him with a curious glance. "What exactly are you looking to find out?" the technician asked, his tone neutral. Jason hesitated, unsure how to put his fears into words. "I found this fluid, and I need to know what it is. And if there's anything else in it." The technician nodded, his face giving nothing away. "We'll run the necessary tests. You can come back in a few days for the results." Jason nodded, barely hearing the words. As he left the clinic, his heart was pounding, and a cold sweat had broken out on his forehead. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety and dread. Every time he looked at Camila, the gnawing doubt inside him grew stronger. She seemed oblivious, carrying on with her routine as though nothing had changed. But to Jason, everything felt wrong. The distance between them was palpable, and the tension in the house was so thick he could almost touch it. Finally, the day came to return to the clinic. Jason's hands were clammy as he gripped the steering wheel, driving with a single-minded determination. His stomach churned with a mix of dread and anger, and by the time he arrived at the clinic, he was shaking. The lab technician met him in the waiting room, holding an envelope with a grim expression. "Mr. Jason," he said quietly, "I suggest you sit down before opening this." Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he nodded and took a seat. He tore open the envelope with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the report. The words jumped off the page, blurring as his vision swam. 9 different DNA profiles. His heart nearly stopped as he tried to comprehend what he was reading. 9. The implications of this hit him like a freight train. It wasn't just one person, it was 9. Jason felt the blood drain from his face as the room seemed to close in around him. Then, his eyes fell on the final line of the report, evidence of a severe STD. His breath caught in his throat, and a wave of nausea washed over him. Camila had been unfaithful, recklessly so. She had endangered them both, exposing him to God knows what. The betrayal cut deeper than anything he had ever felt before, a searing pain that ripped through his chest. Jason's anger flared, burning hot and uncontrollable. He clenched his fists, trying to hold back the tears of rage and despair that threatened to spill over. Beneath the fury was an overwhelming sense of heartbreak. The woman he had loved and trusted had shattered his world, and there was no coming back from this. He crumpled the report in his hands, his mind racing. He needed to confront her, but not yet. First, he needed to know more. He had to see it with his own eyes, understand the full extent of her betrayal. Only then could he decide what to do next. Jason stood up slowly, the weight of what he had discovered pressing down on him like a lead blanket. As he left the clinic, his resolve hardened. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Jason knew he couldn't confront Camila yet. He needed more information, more proof. The weight of her betrayal pressed heavily on him, but he had to be sure. There was too much at stake. With a heavy heart, he decided to hire a private investigator to dig into Camila's life. He needed to know who these 9 men were and what she had been doing behind his back. Martin, the investigator, was an old hand at this sort of thing. Grizzled and weathered by years of uncovering secrets, he met Jason in a small, dim office that smelled faintly of tobacco and old paper. Martin listened intently as Jason laid out the situation, his expression unreadable. "You're doing the right thing, Jason," Martin said, his voice rough from years of smoking. "But you need to be prepared. Once I start digging, there's no going back. You might find out things you wish you hadn't." Jason nodded, his jaw clenched. "I just need to know the truth, Martin. I can't live like this." With that, the deal was struck. Martin assured Jason he would get to the bottom of it and would be in touch once he had something concrete. Days turned into weeks, and each day was a living hell for Jason. Camila continued with her daily routine, oblivious to the storm brewing behind her husband's eyes. Every smile she gave him, every time she touched him, Jason recoiled internally, his mind replaying the horror of that lab report. He found himself avoiding her, his once deep love for her now a twisted mix of suspicion, disgust, and an unbearable sense of betrayal. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Martin called. "It's done. Meet me tonight, usual place." They met in a shadowy corner of a downtown bar, the type of place where people came to forget, not to be seen. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he slid into the booth opposite Martin. The investigator had a thick envelope in front of him, his expression grave. "You sure you want to see this?" Martin asked, his voice carrying the weight of years of similar conversations. Jason's hands were already reaching for the envelope, trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "I need to know," he said, his voice strained. With a slow nod, Martin let go of the envelope, leaning back in his seat as Jason opened it. Inside, Jason found photos, videos, and reports. Cold, hard evidence of Camila's infidelity. The first photograph nearly made him drop the envelope. It was Camila, in a compromising position with a man Jason had never seen before. He flipped through the photos, each one more explicit than the last, each one tearing at the already fraying edges of his sanity. Jason's hands shook as he moved on to the videos. He hesitated, but the need to know overpowered his hesitation. He pressed play on the first video, his breath catching in his throat as the screen filled with footages of Camila with another man, then another and another. The videos were explicit, showing her in acts Jason couldn't have imagined, with multiple men at once. Each man's face was clear, their identities meticulously detailed in Martin's report. Jason's stomach churned as he read their names, ordinary men who had invaded his life in the most personal, devastating way. 9 different men, each one more repulsive to him than the last. As the videos played, Jason felt his heart breaking, piece by piece. The woman on the screen wasn't the Camila he had married, the Camila he had loved and trusted. She was a stranger, her face cold and empty, devoid of the warmth he once cherished. The acts she performed, the way she moved, everything about her was different, twisted beyond recognition. When the final video ended, Jason sat in silence, the darkness closing in around him. He felt hollow, as though the evidence had sucked the life out of him. He had loved Camila, built a life with her, and she had shattered it all with her betrayal. The rage that had simmered beneath the surface now boiled over, consuming him. He clenched his fists, the crumpled envelope still in his grip. The rage, the sense of loss, the overwhelming betrayal. They all merged into a single, burning desire for retribution. Camila had crossed every line, destroyed every vow, and now, she would face the consequences. But first, Jason needed to plan his next move. He wasn't just angry, he was determined, and that determination was far more dangerous. Jason's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he drove home, his knuckles turning white. The envelope in his pocket felt like it was on fire, its contents burning a hole through his chest. The love he had once felt for Camila had been utterly consumed, replaced by a cold, relentless desire for revenge. As he pulled into the driveway, his mind was already racing with possibilities. It wouldn't be enough to simply confront her. No, that would be too easy, too quick. She had to suffer for what she had done, for the way she had shattered their life together. And it wasn't just her who deserved punishment. Those 9 men who had violated their marriage, who had treated his wife like an object, would pay too. Jason's nights turned into sleepless marathons of planning. He sat in his study, surrounded by pages of notes and diagrams, meticulously mapping out every detail. He researched each man, learning everything he could about them. Their routines, their jobs, their families, their vulnerabilities. He pieced together their lives like a puzzle, searching for the perfect way to tear them apart. Camila, oblivious to the storm brewing in Jason's mind, continued her life as if nothing had changed. She still went out with her friends, still returned home late at night, still kissed him on the cheek with that same smile that had once warmed his heart but now made his blood boil. But Jason wasn't the loving husband she thought he was anymore. He had become a man on a mission, driven by a single, burning desire for vengeance. The first phase of his plan was subtle. He began planting seeds of doubt in Camila's mind, carefully, methodically. It started with small things, moving her belongings when she wasn't looking, making quiet, insinuating comments, leaving anonymous notes where she would find them. The notes were cryptic, just enough to make her wonder, to make her question if someone knew about her affairs. Jason watched her closely, noting every flicker of anxiety, every moment of hesitation. It gave him a twisted sense of satisfaction to see the worry creep into her eyes. As the days passed, Camila grew more paranoid, her once confident demeanor starting to crack. Jason could see the fear settling in, the way she looked over her shoulder more often, the way she checked her phone with a nervous glance. But this was only the beginning. Jason wanted her to feel the same fear, the same suffocating uncertainty he had felt in those days after he discovered her betrayal. He wanted her to be consumed by it, to feel it eating away at her sanity. The anonymous messages grew more frequent, more direct. "I know what you've done," one message read. Another, "How long do you think you can keep this up?" Camila started to unravel before his eyes, and Jason reveled in it. But this was just the groundwork. He had something far more sinister in mind, something that would ensure she never forgot the pain she had caused him. He wasn't just going to destroy her life. He was going to break her completely. And when he was done, she wouldn't even recognize the person she had once been. Neither would those men who had dared to cross him. This was the beginning of his vengeance, and he was going to savor every moment of it. Jason's plan unfolded with cold precision. He started with the 9 men, each one carefully targeted based on the information he had gathered. There was no room for mercy. Each man had to pay for his involvement in the betrayal. The first to fall was a corporate executive, a man who prided himself on his spotless reputation. Jason anonymously sent compromising photos to the man's employer and wife. Within days, the man was out of a job and out of his home, his perfect life shattered by scandal. Next was a small business owner whose business transactions weren't as clean as they seemed. Jason tipped off the authorities with evidence of tax evasion. The man's business was raided, his assets frozen, and his life plunged into chaos. One by one, Jason struck. A high school teacher lost his position after an anonymous complaint about inappropriate behavior surfaced, crafted carefully by Jason. Another man found himself the subject of a relentless smear campaign, orchestrated through social media, turning his friends and family against him. As each man's life crumbled, Jason felt a twisted satisfaction. But his ultimate target was still at home, unaware of the final act to come. Camila, once confident and carefree, was now a shadow of her former self. Jason's psychological warfare had taken its toll. The threatening notes, the mysterious calls, the subtle manipulations, all of it had pushed her to the brink. Her health began to decline, the stress and anxiety gnawing away at her. Jason watched it all with cold detachment, his love for her long extinguished, replaced by the icy satisfaction of revenge. Her vibrant spirit, once the light of his life, was now dimmed, crushed under the weight of her guilt and the fear Jason had so carefully cultivated. The final act was near, and Jason was ready. The clock on the wall showed 2:45 a.m. when Jason heard the familiar click of the front door. Camila stepped inside, her heels tapping softly against the hardwood floor. She froze when she noticed Jason sitting in the dimly lit living room, the only light coming from the flickering glow of the television. His posture was rigid, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Jason, what are you doing up so late?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual, though the unease was evident in her voice. "We need to talk," Jason replied, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth it once held. Camila hesitated, sensing the tension in the air. "Okay," she said cautiously, "what's going on?" Instead of answering, Jason reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. Without a word, he tossed it onto the coffee table, the sound of it hitting the wood loud in the silence that followed. "Open it," he commanded, his voice cold. Camila's hands trembled as she picked up the envelope, her mind racing with possibilities. Slowly, she peeled it open, her heart pounding in her chest. As she pulled out the photos and reports, her breath caught in her throat. The color drained from her face as she flipped through the damning evidence. Photos of her with different men, reports detailing each affair, and even the results from the STD test. "Jason, she started, but her voice faltered. "Shut up, bitch," Jason snapped, cutting her off. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. "I know everything, Camila. The affairs, the lies, the betrayal. I know about the 9 men you slept with. And I know about the STD you brought home. Tears welled up in Camila's eyes, spilling over as she shook her head in disbelief. I'm so sorry, Jason, she choked out. I made a terrible mistake. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, Jason interrupted, his voice rising with the anger he had kept buried for so long. You hurt me in the worst possible way. We built a life together, Camila. I loved you more than anything in this world. And you threw it all away for what? For some cheap thrills? Some meaningless flings? Camila sobbed, her hands shaking as she reached out to him. Jason, please, you have to believe me. I never wanted this to happen. I was lost, confused. Jason's voice was incredulous. He stood up, towering over her, his anger palpable. You were confused while you slept with 9 different men? While you lied to my face every single day? Camila recoiled, the venom in his words cutting deep. Please, Jason, I'll do anything. Just give me a chance to make it right. We can fix this, I promise. But Jason's heart had hardened beyond repair. He looked down at her, the woman he had once loved more than life itself, and felt nothing but contempt. It's too late for that, Camila. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. What do you mean? Camila asked, her voice trembling with fear. What are you going to do? Jason leaned in close, his voice low and menacing. I've already taken care of your lovers. Their lives are in ruins, just like ours. And now it's your turn, Camila. I want you to feel the same pain I've felt. I want you to suffer for what you've done. Camila's eyes widened in terror, her mind racing with the implications of his words. Jason, please, she begged. We can get through this together. We can go to counseling, we can. Jason shook his head, cutting her off. There's no we anymore, bitch. You destroyed that. Now, you're going to pay for it. With that, Jason turned and walked out of the room, leaving Camila alone in the darkness, the weight of her actions crashing down on her like a tidal wave. The life she had known was over, and the reality of her new existence, filled with the consequences of her betrayal, began to set in. Jason kicked her out from his house. The unraveling of Camila's life began slowly, almost imperceptibly, but Jason had planned every detail with ruthless precision. It started with small things, missed calls, lost messages, and subtle rumors spread through whispers among her friends. Jason manipulated events to make Camila seem unreliable, painting her as unstable and deceitful. When she tried to confide in her friends, they looked at her with pity, their trust in her eroding day by day. At work, it was no different. Jason planted evidence, photos, messages, and incriminating documents, where her colleagues would inevitably discover them. Camila arrived at the office one morning to find her coworkers whispering behind her back, their eyes full of judgment. The gossip spread quickly, and soon, Camila found herself isolated, her professional reputation in ruins. She was called into a meeting with HR, where they presented her with the so-called evidence of her misconduct. She tried to defend herself, but her protests were met with cold skepticism. Her job, which had once been a source of pride and independence, was stripped away from her. She was terminated under the pretense of gross misconduct, her career reduced to ashes in a matter of days. The humiliation was unbearable. Camila, who had once been confident and full of life, now found herself retreating into the shadows, unable to face the world. As the days passed, the psychological toll of Jason's relentless campaign became evident. Camila began to suffer from severe anxiety, jumping at every shadow and dreading every phone call. She started losing weight rapidly, her clothes hanging off her gaunt frame. Dark circles formed under her eyes as insomnia took hold, robbing her of sleep night after night. The constant fear of what might happen next kept her awake, her mind racing with paranoia. Jason watched all of this unfold with a detached sense of satisfaction. He saw her deteriorating health, the way she barely ate, the way she flinched at even the slightest noise. He felt no remorse, no pity for the woman who had betrayed him so completely. To him, this was justice. She was reaping the consequences of her actions, and he was merely the hand of fate delivering them. Yet, as Camila's world crumbled, Jason began to notice something unsettling within himself. The satisfaction he had once felt from seeing her suffer started to fade, replaced by a deep, gnawing emptiness. The thrill of revenge was wearing off, leaving behind a void that nothing could fill. He had meticulously planned every step to destroy her, but now, standing amid the wreckage of her life, he felt no triumph. Instead, he was haunted by the realization that in his quest for vengeance, he had lost something fundamental. The love he once had, the dreams he once cherished, they were all gone, consumed by the same hatred that had destroyed Camila. Jason was left alone with the bitter truth. His revenge had cost him more than he had ever imagined. In destroying Camila, he had destroyed himself as well. Jason sat alone in the house that had once been filled with love and laughter. The silence was heavy, almost palpable. As he stared blankly at the empty spaces where memories used to reside, a wave of regret crashed over him. He had spent so much time plotting his revenge and dismantling Camila's life that he hadn't stopped to think about what it was doing to him. He had become a reflection of the very people he had sought to punish. The hate that had driven him had transformed him into something he could no longer recognize. The house, once a symbol of their life together, now felt like a prison. No wife, no love, no future, just an empty shell of what once was. The realization hit him hard, and he felt a deep, soul-crushing despair. The next morning, Jason made a decision. He couldn't undo the damage he had caused, but he needed to confront it. He had to find a way to move on from the hatred that had consumed him. He needed to make amends, or at least seek some form of resolution. He drove to Camila's new apartment, a stark contrast to the home they had shared. It was a small, run-down place, a reflection of the life she now led. Jason knocked on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. When Camila answered, she looked at him with a mixture of suspicion and exhaustion. "Jason," she said, her voice weary. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," Jason said, trying to keep his voice steady. Camila stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was dimly lit, and the few pieces of furniture seemed almost inadequate for the space. Jason took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "Camila, I owe you an explanation," Jason began, his voice trembling. "I've been consumed by anger, and I let it destroy everything. I manipulated your life, turned people against you, and ruined your reputation. I did everything I could to make you suffer for what you did to me." Camila's face showed no emotion as she listened, but her eyes were filled with a mixture of pain and disbelief. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, her voice flat. "Because I can't live with what I've become," Jason admitted, tears streaming down his face. "I had to tell you the truth. I had to let go of this hatred, or it was going to destroy me too." Camila stared at him for a long moment, her gaze distant. "You've destroyed everything, Jason. There's nothing left for us. What's done is done, and no apology can undo the damage." "I know," Jason said quietly. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know the truth. I've lost myself in this pursuit of vengeance, and I don't know how to find my way back." Camila's silence was heavy, a stark reminder of the rift that had grown between them. Jason knew he couldn't undo the past, but he hoped that by facing the consequences of his actions, he might find a sliver of peace. He had faced the wreckage he had created, and now, he could only hope to start rebuilding his own life from the ruins. As Jason left the apartment, he felt the weight of his actions more acutely than ever. The road to redemption was unclear, but he knew he had to try to move forward, to heal from the wounds inflicted on him and those he had inflicted on others. For now, he could only take it one step at a time, hoping that someday he might find a path to forgiveness, even if it was just from himself. In the weeks that followed their confrontation, Jason and Camila went their separate ways. Their marriage, once a source of joy and support, was now a shattered memory. Jason packed his belongings, leaving behind the house that held echoes of their former life. The process was mechanical, each box a reminder of the love and trust that had disintegrated. He moved into a small, nondescript apartment on the other side of town, a far cry from the home he once cherished. Jason's new living space was sparse, the bare essentials making up for a lack of comfort. He spent his days in a monotonous routine, trying to rebuild his life from the fragments left behind. But the weight of his actions pressed heavily on him. He struggled with relentless guilt, the kind that never seems to let go. The man who had once been full of hope and love now walked around as a shadow of his former self, haunted by the decisions that had led to his downfall. He tried to distract himself with work and social activities, but the scars were too deep. His evenings were spent in silence, reflecting on how far he had fallen. He replayed conversations and moments, wondering where he had gone wrong and how he had become so consumed by vengeance. Camila faced her own battles in the aftermath. The psychological torment she had endured left her deeply scarred. Trusting others was a daily struggle, and she found herself withdrawing from social interactions. She started therapy, attending sessions where she spoke about her fears, regrets, and the betrayal she had inflicted on Jason. The process was grueling, but Camila hoped that understanding her actions and their consequences might lead to some form of personal redemption. The once vibrant and ambitious woman was now cautious and introspective, seeking ways to rebuild her life. She faced the challenge of reconciling her past mistakes with her present reality, attempting to forgive herself and find a new direction. Both Jason and Camila were left with the harsh realization that their actions had led to mutual destruction. The cycle of betrayal and revenge had not only dismantled their relationship, but had also left them grappling with profound personal losses. They were each left to pick up the pieces of their lives, knowing that the ashes of their former relationship were all that remained of the love they once had. The journey ahead was uncertain, but both knew they had to find a way to move forward, carrying with them the lessons learned from their painful past. Years later, Jason found himself on a park bench, the cool breeze of the evening wrapping around him. He watched the sun dip below the horizon, the colors streaking across the sky. They reminded him of the early days with Camila, days filled with hope and unblemished promise. The memories were bittersweet now, colored by the pain and loss he had endured. His life had been a tumultuous journey since those days. He had hurt many people, including himself, in his quest for revenge. The consequences of his actions had been severe, leaving him with scars that went deeper than he had anticipated. As he sat there, the peacefulness of the park seemed to offer a stark contrast to the chaos of his past. The quiet rustling of leaves and the distant laughter of children playing gave him a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in a long time. It was in this moment of calm that Jason began to contemplate his life more deeply. He couldn't undo the damage he had caused or the suffering he had inflicted, but he could make a choice about his future. Jason took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his past lift slightly. He realized that redemption wasn't about making amends with Camila. She was a part of his past that he could never fully fix. It was about making peace with himself. He had let anger and bitterness dictate his actions for too long, and it had led him to a place of despair and regret. He watched the sun's last rays fade, feeling a faint glimmer of hope emerging from within. It was a small, almost imperceptible feeling, but it was enough to spark something in him. He knew that to move forward, he had to let go of his past resentments and focus on becoming a better person. He needed to live with integrity and find a sense of inner peace. Jason made a silent vow to himself. He promised to live the rest of his life without letting anger control him. He resolved to seek out new experiences and relationships that would help him rebuild his soul and find a new purpose. He was aware that the road to redemption would be fraught with challenges and that the shadows of his past would linger. But he also knew he had to try. As the last light of day disappeared, Jason stood up from the bench, feeling a sense of resolve. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a path he was ready to walk. He knew that while he could never completely escape the mistakes of his past, he could strive for a future defined by hope and personal growth. With the setting sun marking the end of one chapter, he took his first step toward a new beginning, a journey toward redemption and self-discovery.